levels of scientific evidence point to a changing climate. Many of us have experienced extreme temperatures and know that climate change is already happening. But what's going to happen if we don't act? This video presents the latest information from several independent measures of observed climate change that illustrate an overwhelming, compelling story of a planet that is undergoing global warming. It is worth noting that increasing global temperature is only one element of observed global climate change. Precipitation patterns, storms, and other extremes are changing as well. The Paris Agreement on Climate Change aims to keep the global average surface temperature increase below 2 degrees Celsius with respect to pre-industrial temperatures. The aspiration is to restrict the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Given that the global average temperature has already risen by 1 degree Celsius, climate change mitigation, as required by the Paris Agreement, implies a global revolution in terms of energy generation and industrial development on the planet. The agreement, through mechanisms such as the Green Fund of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, also offers significant funding opportunities for developing countries to pursue their industrial development through forms of energy that are low in carbon emissions. South Africa has ratified the Paris Agreement and has committed to an ambitious climate change mitigation program through its intended nationally determined contributions. This commitment has significant implications for South Africa's energy futures and may imply tremendous opportunities for the country to align its industrial development and technological innovation to what may well become a new global industrial revolution. In South Africa, temperatures over the interior are rising at about twice the global rate of temperature increase. This has resulted in South Africa experiencing increases in the frequency of heat wave days. The 2015-2016 El Nino in particular was the strongest ever recorded, with significant impacts through drought and oppressive temperatures in southern Africa. There are two main scenarios. One is a low mitigation or business as usual scenario. This is where we leave climate change unchecked. The other is a future in which the Paris Agreement is implemented. In a low mitigation scenario, as warming slips past the 2 degrees Celsius threshold, the impacts are likely to be vast. Many of these effects will have huge implications for food security, water availability, energy demand, employment, exports, and tourism. But it does not end there. In areas where more rain and higher temperatures are projected, tropical diseases such as malaria may become more prevalent. In addition, an increase in the occurrence of extreme weather events may increase the risk of cholera outbreaks, especially in informal settlements where sanitation is lacking and residents often do not have access to safe drinking water. An increase in heat waves will increase the demand for energy for cooling systems, placing a burden on power utilities. As climate change is left unchecked, Southern Africa is likely to experience reduced rainfall coupled with enhanced evaporation, with more frequently occurring droughts. Extreme weather events such as severe thunderstorms and intense landfalling tropical cyclones. Rising sea levels will also affect coastal cities and communities. More intense storms may potentially impact road infrastructure, coastal erosion, and South Africa's harbours. These impacts, while potentially significant, may be occurring increasingly in the near future. Drastic increases in temperature have already occurred over southern Africa, and the region is committed to further climate change. In recent years, South Africans caught a wake-up call where we witnessed heat waves, storms, and devastating fires, whilst finding our taps running out of water due to reduced rainfall coupled with increased temperature. These impacts have demonstrated how vulnerable we are to climate variability and a changing climate system. More heat waves will also lead to reduced maize crop yield and increased livestock mortality, with potentially devastating consequences for food security if regional temperature increases approach values as high as 6 degrees Celsius. Climate change will also impact South Africa's rich biodiversity. With an increase in temperatures and decrease in rainfall, the frequency and intensity of wildfires may increasingly threaten biodiversity in the fynbos biome. Under rising levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide, bush encroachment may increasingly occur in the southern African savannas and grasslands. So what can be done globally and nationally to mitigate climate change? What are the responsibilities of and opportunities for South Africa within the context of the Paris Agreement? Let's take a look at the second scenario. Paris Agreement future. Important aims of the agreement are to: firstly, limit global temperature increases to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with the aspiration of limiting the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Secondly, accelerate emissions reductions by inducing a global revolution in energy generation. That is, walking away from fossil fuels towards low carbon emissions forms of energy, such as nuclear and renewable energy. Third, foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions development. And finally, make funding available to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and induce climate resilience by funding large-scale adaptation programs. South Africa signed the Paris Agreement along with 194 other parties, and we have an obligation to make every effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, South Africa has a very ambitious program towards reducing its own emissions and is respected in the international climate change fraternity. So, we could say that we have chosen the scenario that we as a country would like to contribute to realizing. Should the Paris Agreement be a success, it will imply a revolution in the ways in which we live on the planet. The transport system will undergo a revolution, with electric cars completely replacing combustion engine cars. The way in which energy is generated will change. To mitigate the impacts of climate change and halt temperature increases, we would need to convert to nuclear and renewable forms of energy for a large portion of our energy requirements. This revolution would also necessitate the development and utilization of new technologies. Huge investments in new technologies that will enable atmospheric carbon dioxide removal will be imperative. What is CSIR doing about climate change? We are building Africa's first Earth system model. This model will incorporate the physics and chemistry of the atmosphere, land, oceans and their interactions, and aim to answer questions such as what might happen to South Africa's and Africa's climate if greenhouse gas concentrations continue increasing. For example, research is being undertaken to explore whether climate change will result in the more frequent occurrence of strong El Niño events and drought in southern Africa. The result will be a climate model developed through an African lens, with a particular focus on African and Southern Ocean climate issues. We are performing research to accurately describe the risks and vulnerabilities that climate change possesses to a range of sectors in South Africa, including the energy, agriculture, water and mining sectors. We assist in the formulation of climate change adaptation strategies for companies, municipalities, provinces, and the country. During 2016 and 2017, the CSIR has led the formulation of South Africa's third National Communication on Climate Change for the Department of Environmental Affairs. The CSIR is standing by and ready to assist various sectors in participating in this global revolution to combat climate change. We acknowledge that while industrial development offers countless opportunities for growth, it also affects people, their health, and the environment. For example, the Waterberg area is a biodiversity-rich area but has undergone a lot of development that may potentially negatively influence the natural environment and people. We emphasize that industrial development should not happen at the expense of people and the environment. We have a responsibility to protect the environment and rich natural heritage of South Africa whilst pursuing our ambitious development goals.